Welcome to episode 18 of Sullivan Street, where we are going to talk to special guest David Lowery. But first, I'll say hello. Good afternoon to Chris Meigs.
Hey, Eric, how's it going?
Fantastic. I'm excited. We've been on a roll. We've had some great guests, and it's continuing with a very special guest today, David Lowery. So, for Counting Crows fans, of course, most famous for being the producer of their esteemed, unique, well loved album, This Desert Life. And we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about that. But for those that don't know that or wanted to know a little more, of course, leads two bands, Cracker and Camper von Beethoven, had all sorts of producing and credits, not just the Counting Crows, This Desert Life. Involved currently a university teacher at the University of Georgia in their music business department and all sorts of other side jobs. It's an eclectic, which I love. I love people with eclectic jobs and backgrounds. But I counted about like at least 5 solo albums, at least what I think 9 Cracker studio albums, and Kimber von Beethoven, I think at least 9 albums. Either way, can clarify things. Welcome to Sullivan Street, David Lowery. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you. Yeah. I think it's like 8 proper Cracker studio albums and 8 proper Camper Van Beethoven's
Okay.
albums. And then there's lots of B-sides and oddities and weird one-offs. And then there's 5 solo albums.
I mean, that's a lot of production and a lot of time.
That is a lot of stuff. Yeah. So it goes back, 40 years basically. And, kind of you start at the beginning how did sort of how I got involved in this project is because one of the guys that played off and on with Camper Van Beethoven was David Immergluck, and David Immergluck's roommate was Adam Duritz, and David Immergluck would bring Adam Duritz to our shows and or be around our shows and stuff like that. So that's where I first met Adam.
Okay, so you met
David Immergluck.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know him very well, but we'd go, maybe to dinner before a show or something like that, and he would be there, and he was, always sort of like super into music. I knew it was singing, but I didn't really know what he did or anything like that.
And that was before August was released, I guess. August and everything.
That was before. I think some of those shows go back to before there was a Counting Crows.
Right.
I think it's like 1990 or so, right?
Oh no, I think it's like the late 80s.
Late 80s, even. Okay.
So, yeah, even.
Okay. Great.
So yeah, there's a David Immergluck connection between the
and Chris said reminded me that David had played a bit with you, etc.
Yeah.
So that he seems to know was connected in the music business at that time, and still is.
Well, and you ended up touring. I mean, so part of the origin story with Cracker and Counting Crows, right, is that the first Counting Crows shows post August release were all supporting Cracker, right? Was that something that you guys kind of set up because you knew they were putting out a record, or was that just a record label happenstance? They put 2 San Francisco based at the time's bands together, or
we weren't on the same label when we didn't have the same agent, but our agent and managers were kind of very aware of each other. And, their sense was from a lot of people that heard this album before it came out, the demos, like there was like a sense that I heard it too. It's like, I remember Jackson, our manager, playing August and everything in his car for me. He goes, "This is going to be big." And I was like, "Yeah, it's going to be big." It's like, and from something like that happened where managers, agents talk to each other. And then we sort of, I mean, even before I realized we had a connection to them, you know what I mean? Like the agents and managers sort of weren't aware of our connection or whatever. And so that's sort of how we got on that tour. And so that tour is in 2 parts. In the fall, we headlined and Counting Crows opened for us. And both of us put out records that really quickly became hits. Ours, though, lagged behind sort of its movement up from, college radio to modern rock or alternative radio to mainstream radio. Ours lagged way behind Counting Crows, that just sort of really quickly just went into like sort of the mainstream charts. So we flipped, right? we flipped opening. I mean, they did obviously sell a lot more records than Cracker did, but Cracker sold 1 million records on that thing, and so we started this tour, and within like about 10 days of starting that tour, I would say like all the shows sold out, right? Just, and some of them were moved to bigger venues and stuff like that. So it was a cool thing. I'd never really been part of that, like two bands playing together, and both of us have like kind of it records happening. So by the time the second half of the tour, which I think started in February of 94, am I in the right year?
Yeah, it's like January,
Yeah,
February. Yeah.
yeah, I'm not going to end up in a DOJ report or anything from not remembering what my big record was, right? Um, sorry, a little timely right now. It's just, but yeah, so I think at the beginning of '94, we switched places where the Counting Crows are the headliner and we're the opening act. It's still working great for both bands. And we basically did almost a year on the road. At least we did 2 semesters on the road. Shall we put it that way for the college professors? We did 2 semesters on the road, and then the summer session, I did a package tour with Spin Doc. We did a package tour with Spin Doctors and Gin Blossoms. But yeah, Counting Crows, right there, right at the beginning, kind of both came up together, and so we were all very close. We all know each other very well. I think we still, all are on text threads here and there. And
That's great.
yeah.
Kind of random.
So
Back then, we were just talking to Chris Porterfield in the last episode, and they did some songs where the bands would play together, or they would come out.
mhm.
Yeah, did you guys do any songs together at that time? Because I didn't see Counting Crows at that stage of their touring.
I think on that tour there was a few times where we did "You Ain't Going Nowhere."
Okay.
Dylan
Yep.
kind of, there's a lot of people have done that song. But I know that later we did this thing called the Traveling Apothecary Tour, where we kind of just threw members of Cracker, Camper Van Beethoven, went on both my bands kind of, this is the late 90s, early 2000s. We went on a tour and we just would have these guests in all these towns. And so when we were in California, we always had like either Dan, Emmy, and Adam. Two of those three were always with us when we played on the West Coast. When we did that sort of tour together, we just constantly bring guests in, stuff like that. And so yeah, we did some jamming, as it were. And David did some recording with us when he wasn't. David Immerglick did some recording with us when he wasn't recording with Counting Crows or touring with Counting Crows. So there's a lot of cross fertilization going on.
Yeah. I wonder if there are any tapes of those shows. I don't think I've ever heard any of those. That sounds amazing.
There's on the okay. Virgin has two different greatest hits records of ours, which they really shouldn't have done. They tried to repackage us, and then we sort of did our own. So there's one called Garage Door, and if you get the bonus disc that comes with Garage Door, it's Dan Vickery, David Immergluck, and Adam Duritz, and we're doing easy. I think this is a song called "You Ain't Going Nowhere." I think it's actually called "Easy Chair." Isn't that what that song's called?
I think it's
Ooh,
yeah. I mean, I think it's "You Ain't Going
it's
Nowhere," but like he also screamed "Easy Chair" is the main line, right?
yeah. Some people call that song "Easy Chair," so I don't know what's going on with that song. It's one of those weird Bob Dylan songs out there,
Yep.
but
And they recorded it. Yeah, a
a lot
couple
of people have
times.
recorded it. Yes, so there's a version of that recording with us, and
Okay,
That's
that's
awesome.
great.
right before, or maybe that even occurs. One of those shows occurs right when we're in the middle of doing This Desert Life. It's all right around that time.
So that kind of leads me to the next question, because you brought up some of the timing, and also you mentioned how you originally knew Emmy and Adam, but then how did you end up actually producing or get invited, or whose idea was it to produce the third album?
Well, I know Adam was a big fan of the Sparkle Horse records that I
Yes.
did. The first one is sort of the main one, and he was got interested in me as a producer, and we had kind of talked about it, but then we were talking about it, and then I thought, and it seemed like in a weird way, like I felt like right at the beginning, it's like, I don't know if I can do this record myself. And I think so. What I think really was the clincher on this was I said, hey, yeah, I'd be interested in doing this. What do you think about doing it with Dennis Herring and me doing this record? And Dennis is a very intense guy. He's another producer. He produced some of the Camper stuff, some of the Cracker stuff. But he also liked Dennis's production of a certain Cracker record. And so that's sort of what I remember is that's sort of how it came into being. And Dennis had also just done a huge Modest Mouse record,
Hmm.
I believe, right around that time. And so it sort of came together that way. I think Adam was thinking like, well, maybe we should work on something and do a record together. But because I kind of put together this team, it became a go pretty quickly from what I remember. Now, what happened though was we were about to start that record, and Dennis Herring got really sick. He got mono, and he could really basically barely get out of bed. So we started that record without him. And it's interesting because then what we were doing is like, well, I don't know if we have our full team together here. Let's just see what we got, start writing the stuff and everything like that. And it was almost like an expectation. We were sort of waiting, almost like sort of we were doing elaborate demos and
Hmm.
songwriting sessions and pre-production. But a couple of the songs emerge from that before we really have the full sort of crew and team together. So it was about 3 months there. And of course, the song that emerges from that is Hanging Around, the first
Hmm.
song on the record.
And do you think that was
Yeah.
partly because you were kind of hanging around and some had extra time?
Yeah, well, we were kind of going through maybe, but he had the okay. So Adam comes in one day to those early sessions, and he's got a number of ideas. He play on piano. He's like, and then I got this, and just sort of realizing it was sort of this weird. It wasn't like the other songs, and he had done it on some sort of 4-track, and there was, you know, just like a little 4-track, and Ben was playing drums. It was all over compressed and sort of over modulated, and it was just Adam sort of playing piano and just had some vague words and sort of the hanging around part. It was really like sort of a fragment. It wasn't more written like other songs, but it had this cool vibe from the demo because the drums were like over compressed. It sounds almost like, a handball. The snare drum sounds almost like a handball in a handball court, you
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
or a squash court or something like that. Big echo. It was sort of crazy.
Yeah.
And so we started building the song on the demo. Like the demo actually is in there. It starts the song.
Yeah, I was
And
going
we
to ask,
started building the song on the demo.
what is that sound effect that kicks off the song? Couldn't tell if it's a
Boom.
good.
That's a drum set, but
Yeah, and there's
it's,
even something that sounds like water bubbling in the beginning, but I think
yeah,
it's
well, because they have
Charlie.
it so compressed, like
Okay.
even the most quietest thing, probably the motor of the cassette 4-track is making that bubbly sound because it's
Hmm.
Okay.
it's so over compressed. And it's just kind of weird, and it starts out with that and people talking, and then gradually, like the song that we built in the house. And also, I need to paint the picture here. This is in a house
Right in
in
the
the
house.
Hollywood Hills. And it's like some like 70s television producer's house or something like that. It's a little
Okay.
dated, it's a little falling apart, but it's cool. It's a cool Hollywood vibe. And the fence goes up onto sort of public land that then looks down into the Hollywood Bowl, right?
Huh.
So it's kind of Hollywood, but sort of faded, jaded Hollywood. It's got a little pool there. It's a good spot, right? It's kind of a good vibe. And we're just recording in the house. We set up the control room in like a bedroom, and they're recording in the living room, and I'm living down in sort of the garage. And our engineer, we had 2 engineers. One was living above, sort of in the guest house, and another one would actually live nearby, so he just commuted in. So
Hmm.
we were just kind of living there, and the band would come over And, sometimes they'd get there at noon and sometimes they'd get there at 8 at night, because it was very loose at first. And so it's us sort of dabbling around with that song and adding things to it. And just really, really, like, okay, let's start building this song, built it around a demo and started gradually adding tracks to it. And it wasn't a song that we recorded all at once. It was like sort of we got a start on it and then we started, but it wasn't really finished and there was something not working with it. And so, we left it alone and we started recording other things. But eventually, like once Dennis Herring showed up, I brought him back to the song. I go, there's something here. The song is really good. This to me sounds like a hit. And, just got the feel of it. It feels like hot chocolate, but it also feels like hot chocolate being the kind of the soul kind of band, but it's got some Motown element to it or something like that. It's like, what's going on here? And I remember Dennis coming in and he just goes, the bass isn't right. We got to get the bass right on it. Okay. And so here's one of the dark secrets of this record that nobody knows until you guys, except for me and Dennis, know. Nobody knows this. We brought in the original bass player from Cracker, Davey Farragher, who, he's plays with Elvis Costello now. He's the imposter, and he's just regarded now as like perhaps one of the best rock bass players and backing vocalists out there. And I brought him, me and Dennis brought him in and said, what would you play on this song? Right? Because we knew he would thread the needle from rock to soul, partly because like Davey was in a band when he was 14, a soul band when he was 14 with his brothers, right? And then the first all-white act on Soul Train. Davey just is super versatile. And he just put this like totally bouncy Motown-ish like bass part on the song, and the song just exploded and opened up, right? So
the bass is very. I was just thinking yesterday because I re-listened to the album.
The vocal, he's playing against the vocal in this weird way. Okay, so then Adam comes in and he goes, oh my God, that bass part is great. And then he turns to Matt. He goes, Matt, that's incredible. And goes, Matt goes, I didn't play this. I don't know who played this. and Adam looks at me. He's like, who played this? And I was like, Davey Farragher. He's like, he got really mad. He said, now we can't go back. Like, Matt has to play the bass on this song, but you have opened Pandora's box. Now we can't go back. Anyway, so what ended up happening is about halfway through the record, but this puts life back into the song. And we had to then basically get Matt to play the same part. And the whole time, this goes on for about a week, and Adam would show up every once in a while and he goes, I can still hear the difference. I can still hear the difference. It's not right. It's not right. It's not right. So we just kept grinding Matt and everything on it. And then finally we got it. Like, it was really close. And Adam came in and was like, yeah, that's good. Great. Don't ever do that again or whatever like that. And so like, I don't know, it takes about a year before we get to mixing. About a year later, we're mixing this thing. And me and Dennis are in there with Jim Scott. And we're listening to it and everything like that. And I just looked at Jim Scott. I go, is this Matt's bass part? He goes, no, I found another bass part. It's better. Put Davey's bass part back on the record. So on the record, it's actually Davey playing. And I don't think Adam ever realized that.
Okay.
Wow.
There you go. We have a Sullivan
completely uncredited on it.
So
Jim put Davies, but I mean, we were just totally trying to get it as close as possible. But I guess I just came in one day and it just felt different. It felt better. It was just the mix was floating, and then I just was like, "Wait a minute, is this the bass part that we gave you?" He goes, "No, it's the other one that was on here."
Yeah, and as talented as Matt is, he might not be able to do it in that way. Exactly.
So anyway, I didn't say anything because that's what made the thing lift off.
That's great. And just before we go,
it does lift off. That's what the song does lift off, and it's interesting that just
as soon as that bass comes
something
in,
about the way
and you're like,
play.
oh, whoa, we're in this other realm or something. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I didn't mean to talk so long about that song,
Oh
but
no.
Oh
that's
no,
like
It's
that's
fascinating. No.
that
biggest
sort of
hit
paints
from
the whole picture on that, right?
I
that was
also
the
like that the
video.
picture you paint is basically it sounds like a Warren Zevon song of the like you guys in the Hollywood Hills looking down,
Yeah.
just sort of like looking over the city as in this like crumbling like old. I imagine it wasn't crumbling, but like just
It
the
wasn't
old house.
crumbling, but
Yeah.
I'm sure what happened after that is somebody, it was on the market. Somebody sold that and redid it. You know what I mean? After that. And,
It,
um,
I'm guessing you never had an experience before or after such as this recording in a house on the hill.
yeah, I mean, it took 18 months. I left and did a cracker tour in the middle of it.
I
It
didn't.
was taking so long, right? You know,
Yeah, it's funny that
my oldest son was born during this record. I went home and then brought the family. It was like totally crazy, right? I went back to Virginia. His son was born.
yeah, it's interesting, Chris, that it took so long because it actually was
Because there was
released for
some
3 years.
mixes and there was
Yeah, yeah.
remixes. Actually, I may be wrong about who did the final mix on that record. Maybe that was Jack Joseph Puig.
Hmm.
I thought it was definitely Jim Scott that inserted that bass part, the
Mhm.
Davey Farragher bass part, back into the tracks, though. So, but anyway, yes.
And yeah, that was definitely a unique song for them. I'd say
Mm.
that they're their first, I don't know, I want to say poppy, so, but you know what I mean, kind
Mm-hmm.
of happy,
Yeah.
except for that demo of Einstein on the Beach, which doesn't count. So
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing is that about that song is the backing vocals. We got so many people into the room. Like literally, I think one night Adam brought people over from a party at his house, and we had to set up the studio like at midnight, and brought like 20 people over just to clap because the claps didn't sound big enough. And then we ended up having some of the people that could actually sing, so that on the chorus, there's just tons of uncredited people on
yes,
that chorus clapping and singing to do that. And so, there's a lot of strange things happened with that song. It's not like you started on it and proceeded to finishing it. It just kept floating different ways, right?
Yeah, that's what's kind of curious about the whole overall record process because I know the idea was, hey, we're gonna come in not with the songs, right? Maybe with some fragments
Mm-hmm.
and kind of do the
Mm-hmm.
writing
In
together. And I
there, and
was,
yeah.
yeah, I was kind
I'm
of curious, like
sorry.
how involved how involved you because of that was the process, sort of how involved you ended up being, kind of shaping the songs. Is sorry.
Arrangement wise, yeah. I mean, I was in there like very early on, so arrangements wise, I'm suggesting arrangements. I'm kind of a weird producer though, so you know what? Pause for a second
yep.
because I want to listen to something on at least on the Saturday mornings. What is it? Saturday nights and Sunday mornings. I think that's the one we did. Maybe they are the same.
Hmm.
I think that's the one we did. But what I was going to say in particular about all of this is, let me go back to the track list because I want to have the right. Make sure I don't miss one. Definitely Mrs. Potter's Lullaby, All My Friends, St. Robinson, His Cadillac Dream. I was always pushing for these songs to be more jammy, right? So if I'm bringing anything to the party arrangement wise, I'm like, yeah, go ahead and have another section. Just do it. Like just sort of grow into like sort of, you guys are a really good band. You can kind of jam things out a little bit. You can improvise a little bit and stuff like that. So like, so I'm doing the opposite approach of what most producers would do. This was be sort of condense the songs, cut out the fluff, and do all that other stuff. I'm like constantly running around like going, we got more fluff? We got another verse? What if we do the breakdown again? Right. And stuff like that. So I feel like that's kind of a lot of what I was doing.
I'm not surprised, and this is going to come up because what you're calling fluff, or I call some of these kind of extra sounds that they're doing and sound effects.
Mm-hmm.
That I knew there was something going on, and you've said it. And by the way, if the band didn't appreciate it then, they appreciate it now. I think because I don't know if you know that. Like for example, I think a year or two ago, Adam was asked again, "Oh, will you ever in concert?" Like I guess one time in the last 20 years, they did August from front to back. You know, it was just a special
Right.
concert, and people have asked him, "Do you want to do that again?" And he goes, I have no interest. It's not my thing. I'll never do that. And he goes, if we would to do an album from the back, it would be Desert Life. We love playing
Right.
it. And he was kind of hinting because of this extra stuff that the band just has fun doing those sound effects. And
Yeah.
yeah.
High Life would be another one in there too.
Yep.
But yes, I mean it.
Mm.
But they're not BS. They're not bullshit jamming, right? They're
Yeah.
really good players, and they just have a really deep sort of understanding of arrangement and melody and counter melody and all this other kind of stuff, right? So if they are going to stretch it out and add parts and be like more jammy, it has this way of being really well arranged, in the way, that a Joni Mitchell song is jammy, or sort of has extra stuff in the song, but it's not taking away from the character of the song. It's not just so that sort of the Southern rock disease is everybody's got to get a soul power, and all this stuff, right? It's not doing that. And so I hope that that's kind of what I brought to the arrangements early on, you
Yeah.
know.
And I do think that is, again, it makes sense. That is, I think, what also like sticks out about that record relative to the rest of the catalog, right? Is that, again, songs like Mrs. Potter's and All My Friends and High Life, where they have this sort of flowing kind of movements to them that,
Mm-hmm.
again, it's not totally anathema to the rest of the catalog, but it's certainly, I think, more visible in that record, and how
Mm-hmm.
the overall sound of that record versus
Mm-hmm.
sort of the rest of their other ones.
Yeah.
It's an interesting aspect there.
Yeah. I
And
just want to.
all My
Yeah.
Friends is my favorite song
Oh,
on this
that's.
I was going to
too.
ask you. We're going to ask.
Yeah.
That was a question, actually.
So
What we have somebody that submitted a question, and that was his. And I was going to say, and I'm not just kissing your, you know what? That I'm glad you said about the jam part, because my favorite part, almost of the whole record, is the last 20 seconds of All My Friends, where they kind of jam out a little bit on a fade. But as you said, it's like a purposeful jamming. And when they play that in concert, they do it, and they actually extend it a little bit.
okay. Yeah. Well, good. It's a good song.
But yeah,
I mean,
why is it your
yeah.
favorite? I'm curious.
I just think it's, I don't know, like I would play that. First of all, I would play that one for people because I just felt like it was so grown up compared to everything else they'd done to that point. Not that the other stuff was bad, but it's just sort of, to me, it just works differently. I don't know. So I would just play that for other people when I was like, people say, hey, how's that Counting Crows record like? I was like, well, I'll play you something. This is what I like right now. I kept pulling it out as like an example of where they were going and what they were doing. But I just kind of like the song. Something about the melodies appeal to me. The chord
David, we
progressions
interviewed
appeal to
Matt
me.
Malley, and
And,
he that was his, I think, said it was his favorite song on the record. He thought it was genius. All My
okay.
Friends. So
It's it's sort of complicated in this way that you don't hear as a casual listener, but as you sort of get
yes,
into it, you're like, oh wait, that part's different when it came. I thought that was the same part, but it's actually not. And all this other stuff like that,
I
right?
felt the same way. I don't mind jumping, Chris. That in that back to back part of All My Friends and High Life, and where I think almost High Life is the definitive Desert Life song. Even it might not be my favorite, and it's so
Mm-hmm.
unique and has the spoken part, has the singing, and it does this thing that seems very premeditated or whatever. And I think I even read a review that kind of said something similar. That the sound of this Desert Life, the album, sounds very like sparse and open in a way, but then it has, like you said, these complications that are and like dense complications that are still there. So to balance kind of the openness and the denseness together, at least as a kind of a casual music, hardcore Crows fan, but casual music fan, that I think is genius. So.
Okay, cool. Well, Yeah, I mean, to me, when you're talking about this record, I mean, these are sort of the deep tracks from the record, but that's what makes the record stand out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of different from what they had done before that, right?
Yeah. We had interesting, we were talking, again, we mentioned Chris Porterfield, and then we asked him if he had any questions. He mentioned the idea of this record is a little bit lighter in a certain sense, like in feel than
Mm-hmm.
August and Recovering the Satellites, which are, I mean, Recovering the Satellites in particular is heavy sounding, but both of them are just topically kind of heavy. And this has a sort of, it's certainly not a 100% upbeat record, but there's a sort of a fun and kind of a lightness to this. And I'm curious if that was something that you were trying to encourage in the process or kind of bring out like a fuller sense of the band, or if that just kind of emerged from the songs naturally, or
I think that emerged from them naturally with what they were doing. It was just I was in the state where a place where I felt like they should make everything longer and have more parts and act more like a jam band. Partly because I saw them so much live where they would do all of that, and
Does that help
you know,
explain?
so
Yeah. I was just gonna say, does that help explain the fourth verse of Mrs. Potter's Lullaby? Right. That's
yeah. So I wanted to get that. I wanted to make sure I talked about this one too. So Mrs. Potter's Lullaby emerges pretty late in the record, and it gets its verses after, I don't know, I feel like we were at least the later verses. It gets the later verses after I think we might have been in a kind of getting into, let's see, in the deep middle of the record. That was a September when this event happens. Me and Adam, I took Adam out to Pioneer Town. He'd never been out to Pappy and Harriet's Pioneer Town Palace. And I took him out there because there was I had recorded my records there. I love the people that Pappy and Harriet who ran the
mm,
place, and they had this little kind of cosmic country little festival, a tribute to Graham Parsons or something going
mm,
on out there. And they asked me if maybe I'd come out and do a song. I go, why don't I come out with Adam and we'll do a song? I don't remember what song we did, but I took him out there, and he was kind of blown away by the place. We actually stayed up, like we stayed up all night. Like we went out there, we drove out there. I think we were
mm,
planning on driving out there, playing the thing, and going back, but we ended up staying up all night. And then, like, I used to have a place up there, and one of my neighbors, who's like this crazy ex-Marine guy, we ended up going out to his place, which was nearby. It was kind of cool. We just kind of
mm.
stayed up all night and, like, you know, looked at the stars and all that stuff. And we got back, and he wrote the last of, you know, he finished that song there at that point.
where he mentions the Pioneer Town bars and looking under the
Yeah,
stars. Okay,
yeah,
I
yeah,
never made
out
the
to
connection until you said
yeah,
that.
Yeah, I never realized that
yeah,
was fully
yeah,
autobiographical in that regard, right? That
yeah.
it's, basically just a story about
The
an a
last
couple of
of the
days.
great Pioneer Town bars. Yeah, the bowl of stars. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So that's where that sort of hits it off, and I was like, man, this song's got a lot of verses. Right on, you know, because that was my take on everything right then. But then the other really interesting thing about that song is it's long. And so, you know, you're doing the same thing over and over again, but you got to keep changing it. You got to keep changing it. And we got Beck's, you know, the artist Beck,
Mhm.
Yeah.
his father, um, David Campbell. It's actually a really great string arranger. And
Huh.
kind of this was when he was starting to come back. We did a record with him, and then he did a record with his son as a string arranger, and then he does this with Counting Crows. That's kind of what makes that song be able to be, you know, what is it, 7 minutes and 46 seconds long? Is that
You can
when
round
the,
it to
you
eight
know, what the
minutes.
strings come in, and the breakdown and all that stuff, and got Matt to move around some of his bass notes. Um, that's what makes that song
I
so
mean, that
great.
song,
Is the collaboration with David Campbell's string arrangement. I mean, it's not all the way through the song; it's just where it hits, like that. That's what allows the song to be so long.
I
Yeah,
see.
it's interesting. I feel like that was something as I was listening to this record again this week. There's always kind of something coming and going. It's a really,
Mm-hmm.
I will say, if anyone listening hasn't like put this record on with headphones in a while, or
Mm.
as is sort of my habit, I tend to listen to like live stuff more than the records. And just going back to this record, there's always something happening, and it's kind of a fascinating. Things are coming, things are going, and there's always kind of ear candy to move you along. And again, to your point, kind of shift the tone ever so slightly and keep things evolving.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that was kind of
Yeah.
intentional.
Well, yeah. If the longer the song is, the more you have to engage things and change things and surprise things and stuff like that. And so, you know, you get the strings that come in on this record and, you know, in certain key spots that allow that to be stretched out. Now, there's another story about this song.
Mhm.
They wanted it as, I think the record company wanted it, somebody wanted this as a single. And there was a moment where like nobody wanted an edit, but I did an edit of it anyway. And I moved things around pretty radically so the words would make sense,
Mm.
but I cut it to 5 minutes. And I wonder what would have happened if that had been like released properly as a single, because it's a really great song, and that was the only way to do it at the time. Because it's
Yeah.
really hard to get an 8-minute song on the radio. I mean, what you do is you get them with the 5-minute edit, and then eventually they start playing the long one. I just wish I had that edit
And I
somewhere
think
because
Adam
I
said
thought
no way, right? I think
yeah, he
Adam.
said no way. And he got really mad at me for even doing it because I was like, well, I'm going to see if I can do this and rearrange the words, right? So kind of said different things, but it still all hung together. And man, you know, and the string part came in where it needed, you know, a little bit of the strings came in and did all this stuff.
To your
But
defense, it probably would have been a hit. I mean, Hanging Around was a hit, and if that
well,
was like the second single, that would have been a hit too. I think, hit
yeah, I
video and
just
stuff. So
wonder about that. I mean, I understand not editing things, but you know, like I have an 8-minute single as You're a Trash Girl, but we made this horrible Frankenstein edit to keep under 5 minutes, and we got it on the radio, and then eventually everybody started playing the 8-minute version of the song, and it worked. But you know, it's like something that you got to suffer through. And he didn't
Yeah.
want to do it, but there is somewhere out there. There's an edit of that song
Yeah.
where,
Because
yeah,
I have the instinct too. I mean, it's a song. It's one of the songs of the record that really kind of pops out. Like you listen to that record, and you're
mhm.
like, oh, I remember like
Well,
listening to that record the first time, going like, that song's amazing. So you could
it's
see how it
second
could be a single.
song.
Yeah.
It's second song. It's catchy, you know. I mean, we didn't stick things like All My Friends or you know any of the longer. You know, it's a long song. There are other long songs on the record, but that's the catchy one. So that
mm,
goes right there, you know. So or the immediately catchy one. That's what
that's true.
I
I
would
mean,
say about
to
that.
this day, I'd say even for my, I mean, of course, like there's really hardcore fans like Chris and I that like the deep dive into everything. But for what I call moderate fans that see them a couple times and maybe had the first three albums, I mean, that is clearly a fan favorite song. I mean,
Yeah,
people want to hear
yeah.
Mrs. Potter's played it in concert. What
Mhm.
about this is just since we have you here and we have trivia, any comment about the transition between Hanging Around and Mrs. Potter, that it just
Hmm.
goes one into the other and like some clapping and then it almost, right? It sounds like it's almost a preface to his suites, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't remember why we did that at the time, but it's certainly in the spirit of sort of the jammy party up at the house. Let's make it sound like, you know, Adam starts playing at the party and now we go into another song, you know.
Yeah.
That's what it seems like to me.
Hmm.
I don't remember the rationale, honestly, that went around it. So
Okay.
that's a little more.
No, but that's how it comes across. So that's great.
What
I love it.
what we were trying to do with this record is, you know, be a little looser, be a little more, you know, I don't know, so much unpolished, but be a little more looser, be a little more jammy. Just, you know, just the, you know, the house that we rented, you know, what was going on up there as all this, you know, as we did these records. By the way, at some point, Dennis Herring comes back in, and I shouldn't like. I don't remember. I think I worked about 3 months without him, and then he came back into the pro. I think we started probably in a March or in April around then. That's why I'm so confused about the Rounders thing. I've got to figure that out before this.
which we'll get
Maybe we
it,
could do it as an
which we'll
addendum
get into.
podcast.
Yes.
Like, what went on with that? Or was it a demo from the previous album? And just so I know it from, I don't know. See, like, it's super confusing to me.
Yeah.
But because I also had copies of the demos from the previous album, because I think may have been, I heard demos and them playing songs from the previous album as well. So I'm up in all of this. That makes sometimes this hard for me to sort out as to what was the actual Desert Live sessions and what were other things that we did around that time and stuff like that.
Okay.
We'll get that one answered here
Okay.
before the end of it.
Well,
I don't know if I have time today to talk about all these songs. I'm certainly willing to
okay.
get going, but I should mention that 4 Days was actually the first, from what I remember, that was the first thing that they wrote up on the hill. And that,
to me, that sounds like, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, because as someone who's not really a music guy, that almost seems like a throwback song to like classic 70s rock and great harmonies and just a solid, fantastic rock song.
there's that. That's actually true. But there's also like a little REM-ish thing to it. I can't figure out why I think that. It might be just because, I listened to this before I saw that Murmur show last night, but I had gone back and listened to everything. And I was like, what does this remind me of? But anyway, I remember that song being like kind of the first thing we really dug into and was like, oh, okay, this is turning into a song. That like, kind of linearly progressed into a song, not like hanging around where it was an idea we worked on, we dropped it. It was an idea we worked on, it got better. It was an idea we walked on and finally it explodes. Like 4 Days was sort of beginning to end. And that's, to me, it's like we got that one up and running. It was like, oh, okay, we can make a record here.
Okay.
And it's kind of funny. I don't know. You've probably seen them more recently than I have. Do they ever play that one much, or is it play
occasionally?
Yeah, it's not a super every time, but that's definitely at this point pretty much all of the Desert Life songs are at least except Amy Hit the Atmosphere, are at least sort of somewhat, and Kid Things. I think it's been maybe 10 years since Kid Things was played, but all the other songs are sort of in the rotation. Hanging Around in Mrs. Potter's more common, I think, than the others, but the other ones all will pop up, once every few shows. Maybe some of them, maybe it's 2 or 3 times a tour.
Yeah, St. Robinson is fairly regular. It's like on that second or third tier. And then Wish I Was a Girl sometimes. So yeah, and we hope Amy Hits the Atmosphere comes back soon. But
yeah, okay. That was also an early one as well, although I think some of these kind of ended up being kind of more my projects, and some of them were more Dennis's project, and then some of them were pretty collaborative and stuff like that. So
do you agree that one thing special about, I don't know, from the Counting Crows, well, there's a lot of things special, but like some people that don't know them well think of them as kind of acoustic-y or whatever, and then of course they played a lot of really hard tracks, particularly on Recovering the Satellites and Saturday nights, Sunday mornings. But I think some of their, and it comes out here, like I already said, that like their guitar sound effects, and of course Charlie on the piano, I think it's so unique, and of course their harmonies too. And I think people don't talk about that enough with the Counting Crows. What makes them special?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were talking about Baby I'm a Big Star Now. I mean, that's like almost like a hard funk soul thing at times, and like the processing and stuff on the guitars and things like that are very, very far from sort of the natural acoustic sort of. And there's other places on the record where they definitely wander pretty far away from that.
I was gonna say any particular
harmony. What's that?
Oh, I was gonna say any interesting choices there with the processing, and because I know that you can sort of hear that there's choices like that.
Well,
Any
I
that
mean,
like kind of
on
stick.
Hanging Around, I mean, just having Dan play kind of that distorted. Has it got wah on it?
Yeah. That's David. We're hoping we're motivating you that after the recording today, you'll listen, get some nostalgia and listen to the album again. And
Wait, what was that?
no, I'm hoping that we're giving you some nostalgia, and then after we
Oh
hang up
yeah,
here, you'll be listening to the album and catching some things.
yeah. Well, no. So like Hanging Around, the guitar is really super distorted, right? I mean, you didn't,
Mhm.
like I had to go back and listen to that, make sure it didn't also have wah wah on it, but I think the wah was on.
That,
Yeah, I mean, so there's a little bit of like soul style
mm,
distortion, like mid '70s. A lot of times there are things that are happening on the guitars and the keyboards, like more clavinet, more like things like that going through the record that I don't think people associate with them. They more associate the piano and the B3 organ, but there's all these other kind of bolder choices, especially on the keys and the lead guitar through this record, right? And as far as the backing vocal goes, well, that's almost always Dan Vickery. He
yes.
figures the choice. He just pulls it out of the air. The choice harmony part that everybody, if they get bored with singing the lead, can. That's there might be other harmonies in there, but he's the one that they're singing, right?
Although I
So
think
Hanging Around
Charlie,
is
yeah,
what?
in St. Robinson's, I think Charlie sings quite a bit in that song for whatever reason. Like near the end, when they're like, "Get in my car and drive." I think a lot of that near the end is
Oh,
Charlie when he
okay.
still does it live.
Well,
But
that may be the case, but I'm just telling you this. It's like when I was in the studio and they're standing around, they're thinking about doing backing vocals. A lot of times it's Dan that comes up with the first thing and
Hmm.
the first idea. At least it was at that time, and it's hanging around, like the line that you that definitely. I just remember that it's like Dan tends to. I don't know if he has the strongest backing vocal voice, but he's got the little idea that
Hmm.
tips that thing a lot of times.
no, I kind
That
of
was my
always thought that, and
experience.
I'm so glad that it's clear that
But he
he's a
doesn't necessarily
genius.
have the
Yep.
strongest voice for the backing vocals. He doesn't have so he has to work on it a little more, but he usually can hear the note.
Oh
At least
yeah.
in my experience, I feel like that's what's happening.
No, thank you. Validated that. Chris, did you have any important, or did you have a top question or two that while we have him here?
I think we kind of covered it.
Yeah.
Is it-
I was gonna say my one. I don't want to say criticism, but the one song, but this is actually a compliment that I found out later, was that the one song "Wish I Was a Girl." I heard some live versions and I was like, whoa, they really added some extra things, and I like this. It's kind of grown and I like it better. But it ended up that it was very similar to the recorded version, but some of the sound effect, or I want to say sound effect, guitar effects and extra, is kind of buried in that in the album version, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
But it made me, but not when I saw it live, then I could hear it in the studio version, and it made me love the song even more. But that was the one. Yeah.
Hold on a second.
Oh, you might
Let
have
me
to.
play a little of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is where I feel like Adam wanting to do. I'm not going to be critical of this song. I like it. It's just I haven't talked about it yet. But this is where I feel like we were Adams like wanting sort of the sparkle horse elements. I felt like we almost wore it on our sleeves with this recording and this
Hmm.
production. So like the detuned rhythm guitar, the sort of harmony tweeze over distorted but kind of in a pop way guitar, and some of the other little keyboard blips and bleeps that come in and stuff like that. So I'm not sure really like if this was a natural fit. I mean, when I listen to the record, it doesn't bother me or anything like that. But there is something about this song that, like, maybe we needed another 6 months on it. And
Yeah,
I
and if
don't mean
you
like working on it 6 months, but like I mean like that had been put aside, and then we went back to it, go, oh, do this, or something like that. But the fact that it's sort of so stretched out and it's got all these parts on it, it was my prime directive of make the songs longer,
Oh,
put more parts in, jam it out, make it
yes,
looser.
and I'm telling
Yeah,
you that. Yep, and that comes across. So maybe I'll email it to you. But there's a great live version on their YouTube page that I think your advice actually comes out more now, just from a couple of years ago than it did back then. So anyway, great stuff.
Okay,
Um,
well, that's cool. And I don't want to downplay what Dennis did, because Dennis and I, you know, we grew up in like the 70s, and within, like, we were probably slightly on the spectrum, because we can dive so deep into something and just work on a very small part of a song for like 2 days and still keep making it better. Like we were like weaponized autism or something like that. The two of us together, like a lot of this I could not have done without Dennis. Like me going, yeah, stretch it out, add more parts, do more things, without Dennis like, well, okay, let's dial it back in. It's a little flat there. What if you change this note to the third? Like without him doing all of that, dialing it all back into like really super coherent, like everything working together, this wouldn't have worked. Right. And that's like why we could essentially do this. And I got one last story for you that you have to know, that nobody else knows except for a couple people about this. The day that we recorded the strings up there with David Campbell, who I brought into the project, and sorry, I didn't want my dog to make a noise. Sorry. She's bringing me a toy. So the day that we had David Campbell and the orchestra come up there, I don't know, like, so we wouldn't always be there every single day, right? And somehow, I don't know what happened, but I lost track of my day of the week. And I had been out in the desert with Don Smith, the producer of Kerosene Hat Record, and we had taken mushrooms. And I figured out somehow that I had screwed this up. And so I roll into that session as they're recording, high on mushrooms. And I tell you, it was the most intense and beautiful and profound listening experience I've ever had, to just listen to them record the strings on those songs, because those string parts David Campbell is really good at this. But like, I had driven 2.5 hours in from the desert, where I had a place out in the desert near Pioneer Town with Don Smith, and tripping on mushrooms because I had just completely screwed up the schedule for the week. So, because we were pretty loose. And so, but anyway.
No, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for about the clarification of Pioneer Town, because now
So
I
I
know
roll in
Pioneer
at
Town.
20 minutes late into the session, right? Yeah, right.
It's funny you said it. For the listeners that don't know, Pioneer Town is not too far from Joshua Tree, and it's funny that you said that, because when I was re-listening to this, preparing for this, when I was listening to Speedway, I was really thinking, like, this is a song. By the way, it's the funniest named song, right? Because it might be their slowest song, called Speedway. And I was thinking this this fits in like around the Joshua Tree. Like, it really does feel like a desert song.
Right. And no, I think that's the title. Once I took. See, because on the weekends when we'd have our day off, I would go to my cabin in the desert, and I was taking various members of the band, and Adam was sort of the last person for me to take out there. So they all had it, kind of in their blood. Even though we're recording in Hollywood, there's these little expeditions out to the desert. So that's what's happening.
And do you think because your place out there is why they chose the Desert Life title from High Life?
I don't know, but it had to be in the mix as we were going out. Like, me and Dennis would go out there, or me and Dan would go out there, or never could get Matt to go, but because he was living in Topanga Canyon then. He was kind of already living that life or whatever. But
right, he didn't want the party. He said that.
Yeah.
Did
Anyway,
you have?
it
Yeah.
could
Did you
have
have
been
any?
part of it.
And just a quick thing, did you have any thoughts the fact that Colorblind was featured in a hit movie, and to this day people know it from that, and they play it a lot. Actually, he's been playing it a lot the last 3 years. But people know that song because
I that's kind of was a surprise, but it's part of this record, it's part of the fabric of this record and stuff like that. And there's something really good and really, it's got a really distinct character and flavor through this whole record. Even though I know Hanging Around sounds nothing like some of the other songs on the record, to me, I can hear what's the same about it always when I listen to that song. Yeah. So
yeah, we have
Colorblind was also kind of a struggle too. So I don't remember why, but I feel like I can't really remember why, but I feel like that song we really struggled with.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's a very delicate
maybe that's
song.
why I say maybe that's also why I say it's like, it's like that wouldn't have been on my bingo card for that song.
That's the movie
this
one.
Like,
and
yeah.
So I think I only have one main last question, maybe two just comments of just wanting to compliment you. But so when we started this podcast about 9 months ago, we have this, he's not here today, but Jeff Harkness is we now have a Counting Crows historian who has been documenting some of their stories of the last 30 years, which is great. He has a book out called Rain King. But we kind of talked about this, but Baby had a big star, but he just didn't know if you wanted to add to the notes a little bit about why possibly some songs, particularly Kid Things, but I think Sundays was recorded around that time and later went on a later album. Like, do you recall any about why Kid Things, for example, didn't make the main listing? Or
I just don't think it was everybody's favorite song. And, some of these were like, we were constantly working on them. And, there was this feeling like at any moment you could just change it. And I don't think that one, I don't know. I just remember that just feeling like it wasn't finished or something. Not that it wasn't presentable to people, but it's more like this. It's more like this. Is there a better version lurking out there? And sometimes there isn't with a song, but a song will often have a character like this. So I'm going to look at something really quick. We're coming this saddle.
Yeah, and I guess
so. You're specifically about the historical, because there are a number of songs that start out on one record and end up on other records, like happens to every band's, right?
Yeah, and that makes sense what you said. It's just like what really fit, or what were the polished songs, and yeah, that was the best question. He
I remember this. I felt like Hanging Around was a single right from the start, but I'm blanking on the name of the...
By the way, can we hear your voice? Speaking of Kid Things, you know how it's a hidden track, and before and after the track, there's like joking. The first part, they're talking about the lunar landing, and I think after Kid Things, they're joking on the microphone. I think they're making fun of Adam a little bit for not being ready. I think that's the joke of it. But are you featured on that at all? Do you know?
I could listen to it right now.
Yeah, you'd have to listen.
My voice is in there.
You can get back. Yeah, you can get back.
I spent more of my time in the room with the band than I did in the control room. Dennis is in the control room. I'm usually out there with the band. So that's entirely possible.
Okay.
But let me see.
You were saying Hanging Around, there was an argument that Hanging Around wasn't going to be a single, or someone was...
Well, I'm just blanking. No, well, this is... Okay. Beats was founded by Dr. Dre and... Who is the producer?
Jimmy Iovine.
Jimmy Iovine. Okay, so he's the president of the record company right now. Sorry. He's the president of the record company, and he showed up to the session at some point, and we're going, okay, well, we got to play him this song. And, he showed up like, I heard so much about, he's a living legend, right? I heard so much about him before he came, and he showed up and he was exactly who I expected him to be. This is not a slag on him, but he shows up in the white tracksuit with the gold chain, like a nice watch on, he's like a Russian mafia guy or something like that, like he comes off kind of like that. He shows up like that. And a friend of mine had told me a story about Jimmy Iovine showing up to a listening session and said this is, and saying that he said the same thing to him twice in two different bands, the exact same talk. right? And it's basically this rap about like, this song is great. I love it. I dance around. It makes me want to dance around to it, blah, blah, blah. But, this is definitely a top 20 song, but we need a song that needs to be in the top 5 at this point in your career. You got to keep pushing. You got to give me another song, right? So basically, Jimmy Iovine, I heard this story from another friend of mine who had some experience, like, just being on record labels with Jimmy Iovine, or Jimmy Iovine being the producer or the A&R guy or whatever like that. Anyway, he comes in and delivers the exact same speech that this friend of mine had told him about. So I get it the third time. And like, I really respect this guy. And I realize, like, after a while you have a shtick and you're working on so many records and you got his like, okay, well, I got to use talk number 17, right? And he had to use talk number 17 with us because that's what the situation called for. But it was completely surreal as it was happening, right? But anyway, he didn't kind of think that was like a big enough track to be a single. Thank God it was. So, I mean,
Absolutely.
So there you are with that. So,
well, thank you. We'll start. By the way, I didn't just do it for you. I do have this Desert Life poster in my office. You can see behind me.
Okay,
So
that's really great.
That's permanently there. Partly because I'm in the where I live in the inland Southern California, where I feel like desert life.
We probably drove a few feet from your house, like back and forth between Hollywood and Pioneer Town. So we probably were pretty close to it.
That's true.
Is that a gold record over your shoulder, David, of this desert? It's funny because it's over both of your shoulders is the poster for this Desert Life.
Yeah, I moved it so it'd be in the shot.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
It's a platinum. Record, I think, actually. Yeah. And that's my wife's gold record over there. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. I have to do give a shout out to, because my sister said to remind you about another song that people love, and just this is more just compliment. You don't have to comment. Is Saint Robinson, which we briefly said, especially to me, the last 45 seconds, the crescendo of that, and the mandolin and is just perfection. And so anyway, I just wanted to make sure we said that. Well, one thing Chris and I talked about, and this is just a comment, you could agree that. On their first 2 albums, we've seen interviews available on YouTube, etc., of the producer of August and then Gil Norton for the Recovering Satellites. I don't know if anybody ever sat with you like you just did here and talked about Desert Life for an hour. And if not, we really, really appreciate it. So.
No, nobody's ever asked me about this record except for you guys. So I think that's really great that you did this. So thank you so much for that. Yeah.
No, thank you, Chris. Any final thoughts or questions?
I'll just ask you, but David, any stories we've missed? Any sort of like classic go-to stories that you haven't gotten the chance to tell at this point to close it out, or?
I tell my students this story when we're reviewing the recording studio process, and we go through everybody's role in the recording studio, and we finally get to the second engineer. And I talk about how no record could be made without the second engineer, and how long their hours are, and how they're like they're helping the engineer, but they're also doing all the backups. And this was really important in those days. It's the earlier days of digital. And so to most digital recorders, we did that on a digital recorder, could only hold a couple songs at a time. And the only way to really accurately back them up, and you're always afraid of a hard drive failure. So you either need 2 hard drives or you backed up to tape. And it took a really long time. And so we had this engineer on there. His name's Rich Hazel. And this record literally wouldn't have been made without him, because he basically lived above sort of the house in the guest cottage, and often slept in the studio because he was backing up the tapes in the morning or at night after the sessions, which is, sometimes this was like 2 or 3 in the morning when the sessions would end. And then in the morning have to restore sessions if we were going to work on it to a different song. So he was like practically working around the clock. And he had finally decided that what he really needed to do was just live up there, sleep up there, get all of his groceries up there. And he didn't even have a car. So every night after the session, I would drive him down to Hollywood Boulevard or Sunset Boulevard. I think there's a Ralph's near there or something like that. And then a 7-Eleven in the parking lot of the Ralph's or whatever grocery store it was. And his ritual was to go and get his things he needed for the next day and then go to 7-Eleven, get his cigarettes. And then he just wanted to be out of there. So just give me 20 minutes so I can just sit on the curb outside 7-Eleven and eat my nachos. So I'd always let him sit out there, and I would, find something else to do or whatever like that, or just sit in my car and, I don't know, listen to music. But one time I noticed that like what's happening is there's a woman is pulled up in like one of the top line Mercedes. Um, and also a very attractive woman, but maybe older, maybe in her 40s, or whatever, starts talking to him, and they get into this really intense conversation. So I'm just kind of watching this. I was like, man, what's going on? Because he's a fairly young guy. He's like 25, 26 or something. And I was like, this is really intense. What's going on? And she keeps trying to give him something. And he's like, no, but they keep talking. She keeps trying to give him something. And then finally he kind of takes it and kind of waves her off, and she gets in the car and she leaves and stuff like that. And he gets up and comes walking over to me, and I was like, Rich, what was happening there? What was going on there? That was like really, I didn't come over there and interrupt because I was like, what's happening? Because, oh God, it's like so embarrassing. But she thinks I'm homeless. And I was like, what? And she goes, yeah. She says she sees me out here a couple nights a week sitting on the curb eating nachos. And, it's probably somebody famous, but like, Rich and I, we don't know who famous people are or something like that, right? It's probably some famous. And she goes, she sees me out here all the time. And she's like, look, when I first came to Hollywood, I was dead broke. I had to sleep in my car sometimes, So here's enough money for a week's worth of hotel rooms. He's like, I'm not homeless. I'm actually the second engineer on a major record. I'm recording it goes late, and this is where I come to chill out, right? And she goes, oh, I made up stories. When I had to sleep in my car, I made up stories about why I was sleeping in my car and stuff like that. You don't have to do that. Anyway, it was totally hilarious. So he gave her like $500 or $600.
Oh, that's funny.
For some reason, in my mind, this is Julia Roberts. When you said it was someone, I'm assuming it's Julia.
I probably would have recognized her.
You probably would have.
It was somebody with money that was attractive and was still attractive, even though she was like in her 40s. So she was probably famous, but I just don't know these things, right? So,
well, thanks so much for
yeah.
By the way, did you know the trivia about this? Is I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but in the original CD pressing, which I have of This Desert Life, that Cadillac is spelled wrong. Did you know that? And
I
they
remember
corrected
that.
it later.
Yeah.
I remember that being a kind of a funny thing.
Camper Van Beethoven's first album title was a typo too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's the title of the record changed. It doesn't make any sense either way, but it was Telephone Tree Landslide Victory, because it's sort of what's in the photo in this abstract way, and they changed it to Telephone Free Landslide Victory. So like when we got the albums, we're like, wait a minute, right? Anyway.
Well, congrats on everything in your career as it keeps going. It's a fascinating career, super productive. I just think it adds to the richness of life that you were involved in many different parts of the music process and continue to be. To me, it just is more enriching. We only go around once, so you might as well, right? As many experiences as possible. And so thank you, and really thank you. What a treat to have you here on Sullivan Street. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.